Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the ninth session, our second to last one. And this one is called Calling Your Reader to Action Through Fiction. And really, what we're looking at is the motivating positive change through storytelling, or the power of storytelling, basically. Oh, and I'm gonna put links in the chat now and explain them as I get maybe through them, but they're there anyway if people want them. Um, I've actually the very last link, just a wee call out to Marion Clark. There's a lovely podcast with her poetry, her reading her own poetry in it. So I've put the wee link into that if anybody's interested to have a look at that. Now, where am I? Okay. So we're looking at calling our reader to action through fiction, and our learning objectives today are to use fiction as a tool to motivate positive change and to call readers to action through storytelling. So the power of storytelling. Why do we love stories? Well, stories create emotional connections, making abstract issues tangible. So we present relatable characters and experiences through personalization. So by presenting characters with relatable experiences, stories enable readers to see themselves in the narrative. For instance, a struggling farmer facing climate challenges makes the effects of drought or floods feel personal rather than just a statistic. So, when we're writing our stories here and now, for example, in Ireland, we're writing from our perspective, and obviously we will reach our people who live in similar climate, similar setups, if you like, a rural environment or whatever. If you were living in Dubai in a high-rise apartment, you're going to have a different story to tell, also probably a climate story, but you'll reach a different demographic, and that's okay. The idea is that that we're building this personalization through our stories, and through that we build empathy. So the empathy building helps the readers to develop an empathy for the characters, and then that helps them to care for the issues that those characters face. Um, and then we have that emotional engagement that comes through storytelling. And we evoke emotions because the stories tap into universal emotions: fear, hope, love, or anger in particular. Connect us as humans, but they're usually the ones that when we start talking about climate change, that's what we're starting to get into. And for example, a tale about a family losing their home to rising sea levels can evoke both sadness and a sense of urgency. And recently, that's actually even, we would have thought of that maybe as something that happens in faraway places. But, even losing our homes to flood waters, even last week, we had a big named storm that did a lot of damage. So I don't know if any of you saw the photograph or the video of the storm, Dara, making the waterfalls at the Cliffs of Moher go up into the air. So that was pretty dramatic. And then also with storytelling, we have this cognitive dissonance. Now, my understanding of cognitive dissonance is that, that feeling of do what I say, not what I do. That sums up to me what cognitive dissonance is. But the definition of it is the feeling that results from holding conflicting beliefs or values, or when your actions don't align with your beliefs or your values, for example. So when you can kind of stir cognitive dissonance in a reader, the reader will identify with the characters, but will see them struggling against the systemic or environmental challenges, and then they experience discomfort that can drive a desire for change in the real world with the reader. So, and that can be very powerful. And then you have this idea of transforming abstract concepts into concrete examples through storytelling. So, for example, this idea of showing, not telling. And honestly, that's one of those, anybody who's a writer is like, oh no, showing, not telling. But it is so true that, like, for example, instead of stating the facts, like deforestation is harmful. A story can show a character walking through a decimated forest, mourning the loss of biodiversity and struggling to survive. And this makes the impact more tangible. And then we can also ground the big issues in storytelling. So climate change, for example, can feel, pardon me, can feel overwhelming and distant. But a story focused on a small coastal town grappling with rising sea levels makes the problem local and specific. Um, and then, so that's all about the problem, but then we also want to offer hope and agency. So this offering of hope and agency through modeling a solution. So fiction can illustrate, oh, sorry, I've clicked too soon there. Fiction can illustrate practical steps for individuals or communities to address challenges, providing a sense of agency. For example, you could have a story about a community switching to solar power, offering readers a hopeful model. So it's not just about telling those stories of communities overcoming adversity, but you could see, I don't know why, but I think of those like those really heartwarming Maeve Binchy stories that Maeve Binchy used to write. And could you imagine one of those, instead of it being focused around somebody opening a business in a nice cozy hotel, it's now somebody opening a wind farm or a rewilding project or something like that. So and then we also ground we inspire action in this. So whenever writers see characters overcoming those the obstacles, it can inspire them to believe that they too can make a difference. And that, I think, is the thing, because it's just such an overwhelming issue. And then just throwing this out to the chat. Can you think of a story, fictional or otherwise, that changed how you see the world? So think of, a movie, even a book you've read, a story you've been told, something that has kind of set everything on a different axis so that you see it differently. Um, and if you could pop it in the chat, that would be great. And then when I see it coming up in the chat, I'll reference it. But you can take your time to think about it. I think for me, what I'm going to throw in here to get the ball rolling, to get your brains kind of going again, is I read a book about 10 years ago now, maybe more. Yeah, about 14 years ago now. I had just started gardening quite seriously, and I read this book called Animal Vegetable Miracle, and it was by Barbara Kingsolver. And what it was about was how we ate and what we ate and when we ate it. And one of the things that really struck me was she looked at the parts of the plant that we eat at certain times of the year, what's in season. So this idea of eating what was in season, and that was to cut down on carbon footprints, because then you're not taking it from the other side of the planet and so on. And she had this lovely thing about like asparagus in the springtime, because so you eat the shoots of things in the springtime, and then we eat the fruit of things usually in the summertime. And then we have like the root vegetables are typically something that we eat in the autumn time, those warming vegetables like turnips and carrots and potatoes. And this idea of your harvest following the seasons, and to try to eat what is in season. And then I started to try and do that, and I noticed then that the food of the season actually tastes better when you eat it in the season that it grows, or when it's ready to harvest. So that was just an interesting thing, but it really changed how I looked at my diet, and in a good way. So that's one example. So if you've other examples, throw them into the chat, and we can have a wee chat about that further down the line. So let's say that bit. Okay, so now I'm going to have a wee look at, so sort of, why does this matter? I'll come to this case study in a minute. So abstract issues like climate change often fail to resonate emotionally because they're too vast or too impersonal. So stories bring the issues into the realm of human experience, creating a bridge between awareness and action. And they help readers not just understand an issue, but feel its importance, which is a powerful motivator for change. So an example of fiction that inspired change, or of writing that inspired change, I'm going to look at Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. So this is not a change that is on at the minute about it's not about climate change as such, but it is an environmental issue. And so Silent Spring is a groundbreaking environmental science book written by Rachel Carson, and it was first published in 1962, so it goes back as far as that. It launched the modern environmental movement by raising public awareness about the dangers of pesticides, especially DDT. It highlighted how these chemicals were harming wildlife, contaminating the environment, and posing risks to human health. So I'll just give you a little, this is out of her book. It was a spring without voices. On the mornings that had once throbbed with the dawn chorus of robins, catbirds, doves, jays, wrens, and scores of other voices, there was now no sound, only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh. Interesting there. I think catbirds are mockingbirds. I think that was like a local name for them in that part of the US. And then further down the text, I just thought that was beautiful when she talks about the dawn chorus and describing it, throbbing with the dawn. And then this bit here was so chilling, I thought. No witchcraft, no enemy action had silenced the rebirth of new life in this stricken world. The people had done it themselves. So, yeah, so the title Silent Spring refers to a future spring season in which no bird songs can be heard because the birds have been killed by pesticides. And it's a powerful example of how storytelling and carefully presented facts can galvanize public opinion and lead to a significant environmental protection measure. Now, the legacy of Silent Spring was such that there was an impact on legislation. So it led to a nationwide ban on DDT for agricultural use in the United States, and it spurred the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. It raised the public awareness, so it basically educated the public on the interconnectedness of all living organisms and the environment, and encouraged people to think critically about the chemicals they used. And then the scientific community, despite facing significant backlash from chemical companies, because of course that was their business and they were going to lose a lot of money if DDT was banned. Carson's book received praise from the scientific community and is regarded as a seminal work in environmental science. Now, I did try to find the book in the library, and the book itself I couldn't find in the library catalogue, but there are 4 different texts around this book. So it just shows that these are books written about the book. So it shows you the impact that it had in the literary field. And also something that I thought was of note in the book was that the introduction of the book that I was reading, the introduction was written by Shackleton. So I found that quite interesting. So but this book here is a book for young people. This is like a middle sort of like mid. I think mid is what, teens or pre-teens, and then these are sort of older groups. This one here, it might also be one for school age kids here. So so these are books that you can find in your library. And this is a more recent book, and again with a lot more again more recent, but more in environmental conservation rather than climate change issues. But again, this idea that that what you write has an impact, and what you write is important, and that your voice, that you can use your voice to change things. So this Pulitzer Prize winning novel intertwines the lives of 9 characters with the lives of trees, highlighting the interconnectedness of nature and the urgent need for environmental conservation. So that's the Overstory by Richard Powers. And I just thought this was an interesting, these are interesting reviews of the book. One was by Bill Gates. So again, this writer has written a book and he has influenced probably one of the richest men of our time. And the book, what Bill Gates said, the book made me want to learn more about trees, made me think differently about my relationship with the trees outside my window. And he goes on, there's a full like post there in that link, and the links are in the chat. But and you can see how it inspired Bill Gates. And then also Barbara Kingsolver. And we talked about Barbara Kingsolver's writing further on in the or earlier on in the course. But she said that using the tools of story, he pulls readers' heart first. And I love that idea that he pulls readers' heart first. And that's what we're trying to achieve when we write a story. We want to grab the readers' hearts and pull them into a perspective so much longer lived and more subtly developed than the human purview, that we gain glimpses of a vast primordial sensibility while watching our own kind get whittled down to size. And that again that's a New York Times review of the Richard Powers book. So again, these are examples of how writing can climate writing, environmental writing can influence people for the good. So it's over to you now. So a writing exercise. I've given a wee bit extra time this week for the writing exercise. So because you're going to have to think a wee bit before you actually get to the writing part of it. But the first element of it is I want you to try and think. Now, you don't have to write this into the chat just yet, but I want you to think about a fictional character that motivated you to think or act differently. So while you're thinking or acting, or while you're thinking or acting differently, while you're thinking about that, I'll tell you who mine is. And I'm going to go way, way back. I'm going back to when I was a teenager. And what's interesting is that hindsight is great, and looking back on it now, the actual science in these books was desperate. It wasn't good at all. But I loved the Willard Price books about 2 zoologists traveling all over the world, looking for animals for a zoo. And that really tweaked my passion for the environment and for animals and ecology. And even though a lot of what he wrote about was, I would say, looking back now, is quite erroneous, but the fictional characters were these two boys. They were teenage boys. It was young adult literature, and the one book in particular, they went to the Amazon, and they talked about, the Amazon being cut down at that stage, and about vast swaths of this forest disappearing. And it set a panic in me at the age of like 12 about this forest being cut down, and that it would be cut down and we would lose it. And I think that has always sort of sat with me. So so that's an example of a fictional character that motivated me to think or act differently. I ended up studying biology at uni. So then what emotional moments and stories have moved you the most? So thinking about, it doesn't have to be the same book or the same story. It doesn't even have to be a book. It could be a movie. If that's, because movies are still stories. People kind of sort of go, oh, TV's bad or films are bad, but I don't agree with that. I think a story is a story no matter what medium it is told in. So the emotional moment in a story, one was for me, if you think of Watership Down, I'm trying to think of ones, again, they're all ones that I came across quite early in my life, because it was the first time it made me think of this moment or this thing that spurred me to think about change and set me on a trajectory for environmental sciences, I suppose. So So this was in Watership Down, and it was the final farewell where the rabbits are leaving their burren, and and it's just this idea of their world changing so much because the humans have come in and bulldozed their burren, and they're now moving or warren, sorry, and they have to move somewhere else, and it's a really dark book. It shouldn't really have probably been a children's movie, but because it was very, very scary. I think there's been a remake of it, but yeah, that was it. Watership Down by Richard Adams. The book is an amazing read, and then he also um had the book The Plague Dogs, where also there's an emotional moment in it, and The Plague Dogs is about two dogs who escape from a like a an experimental center where they're experimenting on the animals, and these two dogs escape, and they have a plague with them, so they're being sort of hunted down by humans. And there's just, and this is a bit of a spoiler, sorry, but there's the moment near the end where the dogs are doomed, like they're not coming back from this, and they're trying to escape, and they're running into the ocean. And all they had the smaller dog had always just wanted to get back to his owner. And he's going through the waves, and he sees the owner in the waves, and it's just, oh, it's just the saddest moment. So that is definitely look, makes me tear up already. But that is definitely one of those moments in literature that you don't forget. So that was my memorable. Oh no, a memorable call to action is that for me is the Animal Vegetable Mineral book by Barbara Kingsolver. I've already talked about that, but I want you to kind of have a think about it. And then what kind of action do you want your readers to take after reading your work? So, what's your takeaway? Like, what do you want people to do after they've read what you've written? And I think like for me, it's just that they think to change one thing. That can be very powerful, and implement that change. So I want you to write down one sentence in the chat. We've got 5 minutes. Well, I'm not even going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do that. Um, I'm going to pop up the last slide while you're doing that, and then we will share in the chat off. Whenever we'll stop the sharing, and we'll do that. So this is the final slide just to record for the recording, and then if we stop the sharing, I can go back to the questions and do that.